Hey Raghunath, tell everyone about our Patreon community.
Sure, Kaustubha. The Wisdom of the Sages Patreon community is an incredible online yoga resource. If you like the type of yoga wisdom and culture we share on the show, then our Patreon community is a great next step. This is a listener-supported podcast, and any level of sponsorship will unlock a wide range of live and archived classes, talks, and even workshops.
Raghunath teaches, I teach, and we have a host of other excellent teachers on topics ranging from yoga philosophy, asana classes, storytelling, Ayurveda, kirtan, cooking, meditation, and a lot more.
We even have an incredible online Bhakti 12-step recovery group.
So if you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/Wisdom of the Sages.
All right, let's get it on.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Live from Super Soul Farm, this is Wisdom of the Sages, the daily yoga podcast with your host Raghunath and co-host and senior educator at the Bhakti Center in New York, Kaustubha. Welcome to our show and welcome to Sleepin' Sunday. And Sleepin' Sunday is when we bring a very special guest on today. And we have a very, very special guest today. And a very, very old friend of mine, Keli Lalita, who is also known famously as Kate 108. She was the guitar player for one of the prominent Krishnacore bands. Now, if you're new to spiritual life and you got interested in bhakti through the yoga community, you might be saying to yourself, "What the heck is Krishnacore?" It's a thing. It was a thing, and I think it still is a thing. And Keli she was one of the leaders and impressive, and she's multi-talented. Kaustubha's got an official bio of Keli, but because I've known her for so long, I just want to speak spontaneously, if I may. She's a empowered yoga teacher. She, leads people to trips into India. She leads yoga trainings. She is an incredible guitar player and singer. She's married to my best friend. She's got 3 beautiful children, grown children. She was like she was one of the reasons, her family was one of the reasons like we moved upstate, and she's just been like a staple in my life for many, many years. Honored to have her. Keli, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And she's a great singer too. And she's a great, I mentioned that, but she's a great kirtan singer as well. Matter of fact, her Instagram is, which one do you want to do? The official one or the unofficial one? You can say it.
It can be Keli 108. People know that one, I think.
Keli 108, not to be confused with another Keli who's on the show, a guy, Keli Clips, who we love, who Kaustubha really loves. I love him, but Kaustubha loves him. And this is Keli 108, so you can check her out and follow her. Do you do chanting on that? She does a live Instagram thing regularly. Do you do that?
Like every night I do bhajans at like around 6:30. Sometimes it's not exactly at 6:30, but mostly at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. I chant every night and do the Hanuman Chalisa, and then I also now I'm doing Damodarastakam.
Well, great. I just have a couple of announcements here because we broadcast on Facebook on Saturdays and Sundays. So if you're new to this and listening on Facebook, welcome. We do this every day. And you can find us anywhere where you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Stitcher. And we have a whole community here. It's a donation-based podcast. We dive into all things spiritual, Vedic from the East. It's an interesting combination of, we tie in everything from universal connection to spirit, what all spiritual paths have in common, giving substance to the concept of higher powers, the thread that ties together reincarnation, metaphysics, life on other planets, ghosts. We tie in Jesus, gemology, demigods, origin of species, palmistries. It goes everywhere. But the hub is the Srimad Bhagavatam, and that's the rope that we're climbing up. but we tend to go in all different directions, and we have
don't call any gemology.
Gems affect you, man. You know that.
No, but we never.
Why are you repressing truth? Why are you holding the truth from the people, Kaustubha?
I'm not.
Gems affect your karma. You got to be careful what gems you wear. You know this. You know this stuff. That's not me talking. That's the Vedas talking.
I'm not saying there's no truth to it, but I don't remember ever discussing it. So you said we go into gemology. Called doing that.
We tie these things together. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
This is the thread that ties these together. So on our Patreon community, patreon.com/wisdom of the sages, we have a myofascial release, right? Is that what it's called? Myofascial? Yeah. Release class workshop given by Cabrera-ji today. And also our good friend Madhu is teaching a class. What's the class entitled tomorrow?
Ayurveda Q&A.
It's an Ayurveda Q&A. And so Madhu, who our dear friend, incredible teacher, gifted teacher, he's doing he does these kirtan trainings. Anyway, he will give you a free one-on-one session just for our Wisdom of the Sages listeners. So if you email us at wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com and just write Madhu, we'll forward the thing to him and forward your details, and you'll get hooked up with him. He's a great resource and an empowered teacher. So, Keli, what is your coming to Bhakti story at a very young age, too? You didn't grow up into this. You grew up, your mom was a Waldorf teacher. I know that because my kids know your mom as a Waldorf teacher. And you were sort of like, your family was one of the reasons why so many other families moved upstate New York. And you were sort of like a hub of a spiritual community up here. How did you stumble into Bhakti?
I mean, I think you remember.
I remember, but nobody else knows. So we're sharing that. I know your stories.
So actually, the funny thing is that, the first time I ever went to the temple was to meet you.
I don't remember that. Was I living in the temple?
So what happened was, when I was a little kid, my mother we went to this ashram that was near our house in the Greene County, which was the Vivekananda ashram. And I was really attracted. I started taking flute lessons there when I was 7. And, the person who taught flute in the town and I wanted to play the flute happened to live at the ashram. So I would ride my bike up the hills and go to the ashram, which was in one of the old resorts. So in the 40s, 50s, 60s, they had these things called resorts, which people would leave New York City, like in the movie Dirty Dancing. And they would it's like a hotel, but they had shuffleboard and a pool and all this stuff. And they fell out of fashion. So ashrams started to buy them. There's still actually an ashram in that resort. So I went there, and when my mother became friends with some of the ashram people, and the one woman had the only paved driveway in town, and it was the 70s, so I had roller skates.
Pretty impressive.
So I would roller skate past her window, and in the window I could see a picture of the universal form. And I just remember actually mostly eventually going there to roller skate to look at this image, and I was super attracted to it. And then I didn't really know that much about, the religions that I encountered were Judaism and then Christianity, which were, the Christians were saying there's only one way. And then my family's Jewish. And I was there can't only be one way. This isn't going to work. So when I found out I sort of learned a little bit about Vivekananda, and that there was also a picture of the shroud of Christ, and they had all these different images, and it just made so much sense. And then I heard about reincarnation. I was a little kid, and I was this is for me. It made total sense to me. And then later on, you and Steve Reddy joined the temple, and you were brand new devotees. And I went to a show at CB's, slept at my friend's house in Brooklyn, and then I was—
That's short for CBGBs. We're giving the real full subtitles here. We have a lot of civilians who know nothing about the hardcore
scene.
This
is a concert at the Country Bluegrass and Blues venue on the Lower East Side, and I went to this show to watch hardcore music. And then the next day I knew Steve, who's now my husband, from Albany, and so I needed to get a ride home because it was. So I
How old were you?
Temple.
How old were you?
I think I was like 15 or 16, something like that. You guys were like, if you were 20 to 21, I'm 7 years younger than you are. So I was pretty young. I was like, I think I was so young that I had to have a fake ID to go to CB's because you had to be 16.
You need a fake 16-year-old
I got
ID.
your school ID, and I put like, I cut out a little picture of myself and put a piece of packing tape over it and like pressed it in really good. And then they were like, yeah, you can go. So, and then and you guys were brand new devotees, and the entire ride home you preached to me with every ounce of fury you had and all the knowledge you had, and and the thing was, I had just been studying Thoreau at the Waldorf school, which I had, so it had to be 10th grade, and Thoreau read the Bhagavad Gita. But more than that, when I walked into the Brooklyn Temple and you guys were sitting downstairs on the bench by the staircase, there's a little bench. The smell of the temple smelled just like the Vivekananda ashram that I had been to. And it was like this total coming home thing.
Interesting.
So then, yeah. And then you guys kind of like moved away and became brahmacharis, and I couldn't talk to you. And Steve wrote me all these like really crazy fanatical letters. And I was like, he's crazy. So
we were a little crazy there for a while. It was fun.
And then at random, like years later, he kind of like blooped out a little bit and from being a brahmachari, and he went to Lollapalooza, and in the crowd of like however many 10,000 people, I ran into him.
By the way, I just want to I want to interject here. There was a time in the Krishna movement in America where, and this was, up till like the time me and Kaustubha were young men, where you were either in it or you were considered in total Maya. So basically, everybody here on Zoom who's incredibly dedicated to the Srimad Bhagavatam, everybody you're seeing here, this is, how many people we have today, Mara? 94 here on, that's live. And then there's thousands of others that listen every day. As far as the institution of bhakti, you'd all be considered blooped. Bloop means not really serious about this because you haven't given up everything that you own and moved into an ashram. So that sort of like was a sort of undercurrent mood of what was happening. So when Steve left the ashram, he was considered out of it, or she said this word, blooped. She sort of blooped. Now, I think the community now, or people interested in spirituality, I think it's much more balanced, less culty, less weird, less fanatical, that people get into it and they add spiritual life to their life.
Thank God, because that was I don't think it was the most balanced time in the history of the
yeah. Fortunately, we weren't that balanced anyway, so it sort of fit in perfectly. But I'm sorry, go on. So you met Steve again, but now you're a little bit older.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then I went to the temple, like he brought me to the Brooklyn Temple. And first of all, the interesting thing was that I didn't know Prabhupada had left the planet. So when I walked in my experience, Prabhupada was there. And it was like intense, like this intense, like, ooh. This,
because there's a statue.
Like, visceral, full body experience. I saw Prabhupada in the Vyasa-san, and I saw all the people, and I didn't know that was a Murti. I thought it was Prabhupada sitting.
If you're new to that, there is a very, very lifelike, right? It's like it looks like everybody thinks, is that real? The guru's not moving. It's a statue. Okay, so you were tricked with the statue.
But for me, it was like this very, very powerful, full body, total, like visceral thing, and I just bowed down, and when I did, Sachi was like, "That's the girl for me."
All right.
That's the way she bows down.
And I think that he realized that because he was very serious in his heart, even though he didn't want to be a monk anymore. And he was, and we were kind of very, it was not that traditional, like the whole thing of like hardcore kids and punk rockers joining the temple was like a very short new thing at that time. And there was a lot of, reasons why it maybe would have seemed like it wouldn't work for me, because I was and am like an unbearable hardcore feminist. And I was like in this like socialist university studying feminist theory. And there I am suddenly like, in this pretty patriarchal thing, but it was just like the goodness of it and the power of the sound of the kirtan. I was just like, it was over for me, like in that moment.
Wow.
And from that first visit to the temple, I never stopped going. I went every time, and he kind of, he kind of like went in and out a little bit, but because he went on tour with another band and this, that, and the other thing, but I was just like, this is so for me. And it was, for me, it wasn't like, I didn't study the philosophy first. It was more like the kirtan that really affected me. And if I'm being perfectly honest, prashadam. I was like, wow, they're feeding me and they're caring for me, and the sound of the kirtan was so strong and powerful for me that I felt like I didn't actually need more than that. That was enough.
That is a very beautiful story, actually.
Yeah.
I was a little bit more cynical and doubtful and something, but I could understand because you had a lot of respect for Steve anyway, and Steve was like fully into it. And that's sort of what a lot of us don't even realize, that you may not see yourself as a leader, or not you per se, but all the listeners, as a leader or a guru. But there are people in your world that look up to you, and you might not even think like that. And they're like sort of like following your cues. And that's another reason why in Bhakti, what we do in our own personal life is not happening in a bubble. What we do, or our choices we make, or our good qualities, our good choices, or even our bad choices, they affect everybody in our universe. People are cheering for us, looking for us. And the fact that Steve, or Sachi, he was just like dedicated. He, since when I met him, when we got into Bhakti, Steve was our road manager in Youth of Today in the old days. And he was very like a focused guy. He still is a very focused guy, but he was very focused spiritualist from the get-go. From the get-go, he just decided my life is, and people do that sometimes. They just flick a switch. I'm dedicating my life to spirit. And it's quite impressive. That same mindset, when dedicated to material things, gives people great success. And truthfully, it's one of the reasons I see he has great success in his spiritual life as well, because it's that same type of, I'm flicking a switch and I'm completely focused. And I can see how that could be totally inspiring. And I can also see, because you're so musically inclined, how that it touched you, because kirtan, I think, especially, for people who don't know, the hardcore music that we were into was so intense. It was like a full body. You like sort of like opted into the entire culture of it. And it was alternative, and it was intense, and it was completely radical, and it was almost like the dancing itself was out of control. And you've never seen anything like it until you went to a New York City kirtan.
Yeah, and it was like,
you want to share what those were like? Huh?
I just remember seeing, because we were so young, we were like teenagers, and then I remember being in the temple, and there was like, now I realize they weren't that old. They were probably
36.
But they were like in this full reckless, abandoned dancing mode of kirtan, and I thought, oh, you don't actually have to age out of this, like, this feeling. And I think, like, I've thought a lot about, because Raghunath and I are from this, and Kaustubha are from, and a lot of you guys are from this world of punk rock and hardcore music. And I've thought a lot about it, because there's so many of us who then became spiritualists. But all of the Eastern traditions have this concept of like nirodhana, which means to completely still the mind. And sometimes it means to completely still the mind, except for total focus on God, on Krishna, or, Ishvara, however you want to say it. And so there's this complete blank slate that you achieve if you're like in a hardcore show. It's like your mind is completely clear. And I think for some of us, it was like almost like a preparation for spiritual life. Also, like that whole type of music and that whole world is like a constant pilgrimage. So you're like a pilgrim to that.
Right.
So
you're taking the Amtrak train.
You're going, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, you're showing up, you're everywhere with all the same people. And that's like later on when I, did finally go on pilgrim. Actually, it wasn't much now looking back, it was pretty short amount of time. But when you went on pilgrimage and it's like 3 o'clock in the morning and you're standing barefoot in the sand at the side of the Yamuna, you think, I've stood on the sidewalk in front of CB's with my feet freezing to the sidewalk. This is like, I've prepared myself for this. So there's like this kind of like really interesting connection. And I think it's why so many of the great bhaktas that I really knew were born out of that world. It was like a little like, and also, and I'm just about to teach the 9th chapter of the Gita, and the first verse says, like, now that you've stopped being envious, now that you've prepared yourself, then Krishna reveals himself. So in some ways, we spent all these years just getting out all the anger, and your ego is so smashed in hardcore nonstop because everybody calls you out on everything. So you show up at the time, like you're ready. You're kind of ready. So you're like, if you have this attraction to the sound of, Shabda Brahma, like mantra, like God in sound, you're so ready, you're so raw, and you're so open. And I think that's why, one of the reasons why it worked so well.
Hey, Kaustubha, do you like her analogy of the pilgrimage? It was like a pilgrimage to go to CBGB's, to go to the Lower East Side. Did you like that? Like preparation?
You shaved your head. I already had it. Like I had a shaved head.
We already had shaved heads.
Well, I already was like looked freakish. So like when my entire college class saw me sitting on the Harinam truck, I was like, it's fine. I joined a cult. Well, hey guys.
I think that's the most
that really happened.
Important part was it was kind of a social suicide to be into that scene.
Yeah.
And so, and getting into Krishna Bhakti then was definitely a social suicide.
Ravindranath Prabhu says you have to be a double dropout. So like for him, it was being a hippie, and then you drop out again. So first you drop out of society to be hardcore, and then you drop out one more level.
Well, I think that's an important point, because there's a lot of social pressure to be somebody. And somebody you don't even want to be necessarily, to go to a particular school or follow a particular path. Or sometimes people go through their whole degrees that they don't even want to do, but they feel like a pressure, parental pressure, society pressure. And I remember at a young age, to be punk in my high school, I was ostracized, made fun of, every day, like publicly at lunch, in the hallways, called out by gangs of people, laughed at. It was so humiliating, and you really had to be like, I don't care. And it sort of toughened your skin, which was a beautiful thing, because it made me just say, if I want this, then I'm going to have to give up that. And to give up that validation from all of high school, which I felt like it gave me some type of internal strength. And therefore, when I made the move to Bhakti from punk, it was sort of like, I don't care what people think of me. I'm going to do this because I feel like it's right in my heart. Like, seriously? You're going to put on a robe? You're going to shave your head? You're going to walk around the streets? Keli brought up this point in the, what year was that? Like, it was old days. They used to have a truck, the Hari Nam truck. It was like a ridiculous flatbed truck that you would like load junk onto and take it to the dump. They painted it yellow and like really gaudy colors. And it was like everybody would have kirtan on the truck, and it would drive around the city. I remember when Shelter got a little bigger, being in my lawyer's office in on the Upper East Side, And I was like, I hear tick, 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 tick. And I look out the window. The Harinam truck is like going right past us as we sign the record deal. And I was thinking, that's an auspicious sign. There's the Harinam truck. You were on the Harinam truck.
I had to go on the Harinam truck, and I had actually, I don't know if you guys know about this, but we used to be like, we have to go on book distribution and like stand on the street and give books away. But I told my guru that my mom said I wasn't allowed to. Like, well, I mean, my parents kind of didn't want me to like stand in the subway and give books out. Like they thought it was weird, but they also thought it was not a good idea to attract people to Krishna. They thought it was, they were like, why don't you try to get the books in the libraries or like teach in a university? Because they had just a different mood. But I had to bite the bullet and do something culty. And so my thing was to go on the Harinam truck, which then got stopped in traffic in front of the Angelica Theater, where my feminist film class was like all waiting to watch a movie. And I'm like on the Harinam truck, and I was just like, oh God, this is
sorry.
incredible.
I feel like those are tests that Krishna gives you. Like, are you serious about this? Krishna gives you these tests. Are you serious about this? Yes, I'm totally serious. You're serious about cracking your ego, having your soul shine forward. You're serious about this? Yes, I am. Okay, here's all your friends. And I remember walking out of the record studio when we first recorded the first Shelters single, and I had full robes on as a monk, shaved up, and it was the Don Fury recording studio, it was called. And it was sort of a little famous culty music studio. And I walked up this cellar stairs right into Soho. And on the top of the stairs was Vinny Stigma, who Kaustubha knows. Vinny Stigma was like an older Italian hardcore guy in one of the most prominent New York hardcore bands ever, who was friends of ours, but we also looked up to him. And he looked at me, and he's Italian, and I'm Italian, and he looked at me and he goes, Ray, what are you doing? Look at yourself. What would your mother say? What would your mother say?
Well, I have a similar story, which is, and this is going to lead into when I went to India for the first time, which was very shortly after I had moved into the temple. And all of a sudden you realize that this is just this great open culture. It's not in any way a weird cult. It's just like when it was planted in America, it seemed so different that we couldn't totally understand that it was just like this very common thing. You get out of the plane in Delhi and you see like Vishnu light bulbs.
I would like to see if there's like how many Indians lived in America back then, like in the 80s compared to now. Now everybody knows Indian food, Indian culture.
Yeah.
And it was pre-internet also. India was weird. It was foreign. There was no mass communication. There was not even satellite TV.
Kirtan was foreign. But what happened to me, and this is like my story, the final test before I made it to Vrindavan is I'm going to go to Vrindavan, and I'm like so excited. I've only lived in the temple maybe like 4 or 5 months, but at the time, you're 19, so 4 or 5 months seems like an eternity. And it was my big breakout moment, and I was going to wear a bindi. So I get the biggest, bluest, giant bindi. It was like this big. I stick it on my forehead. I'm ready to go to India. I'm wearing a sari, which I never travel to India now, and because you're like wrapped up so tightly and it's just uncomfortable. And those were the days when you like flew to like on Aeroflot to like Moscow, and then you flew to, it took like 49 hours to get to India. But I was going to wear a sari because I was going to the sacred land of Vrindavan, and I was going to where, Krishna lived as a child, and I was like amped up. And who else is flying out of JFK at that moment but sick of it all? And I'm like swearing, it's just so like a chutter, everything. I've got a bead bag on. I'm like chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna.
If you don't know who Sick of It All is one of the biggest hardcore bands of all time from New York.
Nothing. They just said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to India. And they were like, that's great. And they were so cool about it. They weren't like, what are you doing? What
the hell are you doing?
And it was like this really tender moment. And I felt like like I've always like I'm still really good friends with them, and actually Craig works with us now, and it's really fun. But like it was this beautiful moment where I realized that I just was who I was, and it was going to be okay, and I just needed to go forward, rather than them being like, "What's with the giant blue dot on your face?"
Well, we're still trying to get Mara to wear that giant blue dot, but she's refusing. She's refusing, Mara. It's time for you to make a public statement. I think nowadays no one cares. Like, oh, cool. You know, nowadays kids dye their hair purple. Nityananda Chandra's kid had green hair yesterday. It's like cool to have green hair when you were our age. That was like what?
So weird, yeah.
Mara, just wear the bindi. Just wear the bindi. Come on, big
It's
deal.
so pretty.
It's pretty.
I don't suggest one that's like this big.
I know that was like a bullseye.
Well,
But I wanted to like declare my like I was like it was like my moment of like declaration of like that's it.
Yep.
You know, so
It's
sounds
coming
weird,
out of the
but I
Bhakti
really
closet.
I even remember like peeling the bindi off, and it was like the first time. You know, I'd worn tilak and stuff, but I felt like it was like this moment. And actually, I have to tell you that as a child. So the movie Gandhi came out when I was like 10. And then I saw it like then VCRs came out when I was like 12. And my parents let me watch the movie Gandhi. And there's this moment in the movie where this like Western woman gets out of the train, and she's British, and she's gone to become a disciple of Mahatma Gandhi. And she gets out and she's wearing a sari. And my little like 10-year-old mind, I was like, that's what I want to be when I grow up.
Sorry.
Like total.
Sorry, wearing.
I wanted to go to India. I wanted to wear the sari. I wanted to find a guru. Even when I saw the Karate Kid, I was like, why can't I have a Mr. Miyagi? I want to wax on and wax off. I want someone to tell me to do that. Like I had this like long, like strong calling to it. So it just was like everything in my life kind of lined up for that. Even like the whole thing of finding punk rock music, which seems so, and one time you guys I'm sure know who Krishna Das is, maybe not everybody, but I think people.
Yeah, Krishna Das is
he's a kirtan singer.
Kirtan singer we all love, yeah.
Yeah, and definitely a teacher in Bhakti. And so he kind of was like asking me like, how did you get into kirtan? Because, you know, he came from such a different way, you know.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I was like in this hardcore band. I was trying to explain. Like I was in this hardcore band called 108, and like we would like play hardcore music but chant Hare Krishna. And he's good friends with this great devotee named Sachinandan Swami. And I said, Sachinandan.
He's been on our show. Sachinandan Swami.
To our shows, and he would get on stage and he would chant the mantra, and we'd be like playing really loud music. And Krishnadas in the way that only he can, and if you know him, he just goes, the Kali Yuga. It's advancing. Like really deadpan. But it was like, you know, I think for me, it's so intertwined. And I think that, you know, because you're part of that, I'm talking about it a lot. Now I don't think about it so much. But it was this beautiful kind of breeding ground. I also had the great fortune, and I know you just had him on the show, of meeting Adwaita, Edwin Bryant, when I was in college. So he was a graduate student at Columbia, and I was an undergraduate at the New School, and my spiritual teacher sent me to Columbia, and I did my thesis on the same subject that he did his thesis on. So I met him all those years ago when he was at Columbia, which was the origin of the Sanskrit language. So all those years, I actually have known him and been friends with him. And so he's actually a huge part of my spiritual practice and my spiritual life. And working with him is like, you know, but he used to be like, take those boots off and get up here and actually learn something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if you haven't heard the interview we did with Edwin Bryant, Professor Edwin Bryant, also known as Adwaita, great interview. Just you could YouTube search that one. Yeah, we loved him. He was great on the show, and he's super impressive to just listen to his lectures. It's nice coming from a really, he's scholarly, but he's like so like he brings it really down to earth, and he's funny, and that I think humor helps disseminate a message. What did your parents think of this? Like, I don't know how I broke it to my parents. My father had passed away, but I would just leave random books around the house. I don't know how Kaustubha told your parents, Kaustubha. I'd like to hear that story too, because it was always like now what am I going to say? Mara just went all out and completely converted her dad, and Mara's working on the whole family. But how did you tell your mother? Now again, your mother is an interesting lady. She's not like she's much younger than my mom. My mom's 94. You know, your mom was a school teacher, still is a school teacher, I think, and she was already part of the Waldorf community and the Steiners community, and maybe I'll pick your brain on that. It's interesting because these guys are already very broad-minded. Rudolf Steiner is a deep spiritualist. He predicted the bee collapse. If you're into being in beekeeping, he has a very broad mind about spirituality in East and West. It's the one reason why I had my kids go to this school. And so the whole pedagogy there has got a strong twist of spirituality and connected with the earth and farming. And he was the founder of biodynamic gardening. So your mom must have been very broad-minded. How was her approach when you got into it, or did she freak?
Well, so she actually it's funny because my parents are divorced, but and my dad is much more conventional. And so, I think everybody gets a little, worried when your kid moves into an ashram at the time, and someone and we never found out who put a copy of the book Monkey on a Stick in my mother's mailbox, which tells of some of the dark periods of the Krishna consciousness movement, which my mother then read, and her conclusion was Prabhupada is faultless.
This is the interesting story. It's after reading all the dirt.
Yeah, so after
in a sensationalized way, your mom read it and said, you know what, the Swami and his teachings, and that's a good point.
Because faultless. She said the word faultless, and so they didn't. My parents weren't really that freaked out. They didn't really mind. I think they felt like I think they came to the farm. They were always really pretty supportive. My mom now comes to kirtan all the time and is kind of into it, and she brings her friends to kirtan, which is I never really thought that would happen, but she comes to kirtan and things like that, and has made friends with devotees. I'm thinking, back when we joined the temple, kirtan and all of that was so foreign. Now it's everybody knows what kirtan is. So as it became more normalized in American society, I think my mom really liked it. And I think having grandkids that are devotees, she just kind of liked it. And I think also for her, she felt like I was happy. I was, doing good things in the world. I was traveling, I was studying. I mean, I didn't drop out of college I stayed in college. I finished college. They saw me as a happier, more balanced person. So they didn't have the response that a lot of people's parents had. And they also weren't my parents weren't really controlling. So they weren't attached to making me be something really at all. And part of it was I think they were a little distracted at the time, and they were just happy I was keeping myself occupied as well as I could. And, I don't know. For me, it was really they were really quite supportive, and I was lucky in that way.
Keli, I'm going to ask for a pit stop right here, and I want to ask Kaustubha how you told your parents. Kaustubha, I'm going to just turn the interview on you for 1 second. How did you tell your parents you're into bhakti? Well, how did that go?
To be honest, I don't even remember, but you have to keep in mind my relationship with my parents at that point in my life was very distant. I didn't live at home. I wasn't really communicating with them. So I don't remember it, but it wouldn't have been a big thing because I was already so crazy already.
It was probably a move up for them. Okay, whatever. He's not taking drugs. Okay, Keli. So,
at one point my dad said to my mother, she's not taking drugs. She's just she's a vegetarian. She's not harming the world. We just have to not worry so much. So they were supportive, and and then ever increasingly so over my lifetime.
That's sweet. That's incredibly sweet. My mom too. She's cool. She's into it.
Yeah.
Um, what about I didn't mention this, and this is a huge part of it, but you and your husband, you basically ran the entire record company, which put out our records, and that was a huge thing. And now it's, you guys have parlayed it into a serious business with hundreds of employees, and it's not outside of the just Krishna music, but it's like a massive thing. But the unique thing about that and in that time was it was all done in an ashram. Like you ran a record company out of an ashram. It was quite a cool thing historically, what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't seem crazy at the time, but we just had this like Equal Vision Records was like one room on the second floor of the Philadelphia Temple. And then there was a second room that nobody was using that had like just records stacked up in it. And, the first thing, I mean, you really started it, but then Sachi's sort of took over and he's got like a real head for business. So we started doing that, and then we did it for years. And then, there weren't the Krishna band thing, there's not enough bands to really sustain it. So we tried to pick other bands that we liked, but then, eventually what our answer to the whole thing to kind of get back to our original intention of starting Equal Vision, which is the record label, is that we started a kirtan record label, which is called Mantrology. Yeah. And our idea with that was we had all these skills of like knowing how to put out records and make merchandise and support musicians and everything like that. And so we started to put out just kirtan music also.
And some incredible stuff too. Gauravani's stuff, the Hanuman, Janavi, Harrison,
Mayapuris.
The Mayapuris, which was it's our closing song, the Mayapuris. They put out that record. You should do a kirtan CD. Have you ever thought about that?
I have thought.
The world is waiting, my friend.
Maybe I will. It's just yeah, maybe I will. I actually had a plan to do a recording with a friend near Philadelphia who you maybe know, Stress. He wanted to do a recording.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then this whole, then COVID happened and like everything kind of is closed down. But the kind of good part of that is so funny. Like my house is so funny. Like right now, just some devotees came from next door to deliver Mahaprasadam, and then everyone's like sneaking into the kitchen with the Mahaprasadam. So
that's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Devotees wandering in your house with Mahaprasadam.
They're like, quick, she's talking, eat it. So the good thing about the whole like quarantine time was that before this, I was traveling all the time. Sometimes I play for Krishnadas, and I play all the time for Nina, who plays for Krishnadas.
Nina Rao is a great kirtan singer.
Nina Rao is like
I just want to just jump in here because I'm going to fill in some blanks.
Okay.
You play mridanga very nicely. You play harmonium very nicely. You play cartels very nicely. So sometimes big kirtan leaders, Keli, will you come do a retreat with me? And so you went to Greece with Krishna Das. You play with Nina all over the world, really, and she's wonderful. I'm sorry, I just wanted to fill in the groups.
Yeah, no, and it's sorry because I'm used to always talking to people that know me, and they're so sick of my same stories, so I don't have to like explain. But now I'm interesting again.
Yeah.
So I play. Yeah, so I got invited by all of these because of Mantrology, because of the kirtan record label. I met a lot of people that weren't from, like our lineage, but were from different lineages who also do kirtan.
Mm.
So there's different lineages who all actually have the same practice.
Yeah. And everybody does kirtan now. It's huge.
So I've been invited then by those people to come. Like one of the things that everybody in our lineage can do well is play the instruments. Like I thought it was like pretty, just a pretty average to crappy cartel player, but it turns out I'm a hot shot. And so I got invited. Nina is Krishna Das's cartel player, so you have to be really good to play for her. And also she's very like, she's very like reserved person, and I'm like a maniac, so I try to be reserved and play for her. And if I do really, 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 really well, she'll just turn to me and go, nice. Nice. So I started to travel and play for them, and I can't remember where the story started at all, so I don't remember. Maybe you could remind me. I can't remember when you started to explain why I played cartels. So anyway, that's the story.
Well, I think that we don't have much time left, and I would love to get a 108 story out of you.
Okay.
Henry, our good friend Henry.
Oh, I know what it was.
He listens. Okay, go on.
That was the story.
What's that?
I remember what the start of the story was. Because of missing all of that playing with all of those people, and I was home alone, I started to chant every night on Instagram because it was the only way I had to be with people. That's how that started. And I've actually become much better at chanting because I just forced myself every single solitary night to show up just like this. It's like a sangha.
It's the blessings of the pandemic.
Yeah.
It's
and
the
because
blessing.
of that, I memorized all 40 verses of the Hanuman Chalisa because I just played it every night, even if I was tired and miserable, and I just showed up and did it anyway.
I've listened to many of those on Instagram. Thank you.
Okay.
So anyway, we have some old school hardcore people listening to the show right now, including Henry, one of our old friends, where we stay at his house. Do you have any good 108 stories for us?
There's so many good 108 stories, but do you have anything like special you want to hear?
What was it like touring with 108?
I mean, it was.
Well, you're a lady with a bunch of other men traveling around, playing hardcore shows, practicing bhakti. Was it peaceful? Were you guys living in peace? Like you guys externally live, they're much louder and noisier than Shelter, like much noisier and louder. But at the same, everybody was a colorful character in that band. Braj, Rasaraj, yourself. When you got in the van, was it peaceful or was it as crazy?
Well, it was interesting. So for me, it was like a savior because I had been like in hardcore bands, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity. And the ashram, was the tendency of the women and the girls in the ashram was like this very docile role, which just totally didn't fit my personality or the way I'd been my whole life. So it was like a godsend for me that I was invited to do that because I think I would have not made it, quite honestly. So because I played bass too, but I played guitar in 108. So I was invited to, 108. If you had to think of the Philadelphia ashram as a high school, Shelter was like the popular jocks, and 108 was like the art.
We were the popular jocks.
I would have been a popular jock, but just by virtue of the fact that I was a girl, I got into the art nerd band, which actually worked out well, but I had no idea how to play like metal. So actually Raghunath was a great guitar player. I played guitar, but I played like punk rock guitar, and I played in this like feminist proto riot girl band called Growing Up Skipper. So I played in started playing in bands when I was like the summer of 8th grade. I sang in a hardcore band, and there weren't many women in hardcore even, so that wasn't unusual for me. So it was never peaceful, but it was really fun and really valuable. I mean, it was really like it saved me, and also it gave me a platform to be myself. And really there was, I was not going to be like a pujari, probably. I wasn't going to be, there were really at the time, to be quite honest, there weren't really women teachers. I wasn't going to sit on the Vyasasana and teach. The girls didn't lead any kirtan in the temple, so there wasn't a platform for that for me. And that's all changed since then. But it gave me this like opening to be myself. And also like, I felt like somehow looking back at the lyrics of 108 from those early times, like, we kind of cracked open some pretty esoteric subjects and really felt them on a deep level in terms of like the lyrics we were writing and the way we were expressing ourselves. And it was like very kind of appropriate and helpful, and just absolutely like the Krishna basically provided the perfect outlet for me, is how I think of it. And
I look at 108. I look at 108 as sometimes there's secret weapons. Like there's a guy with a cane and he picks up a cane and it's a gun. Or there's like something like there's a secret. You guys were like secret weapons for the spiritual masters going back thousands of years. Because in one sense you came off like this intense, hard, noisy band, but the message was so fervently passionate towards bhakti. You couldn't help but feel connected. And I think a lot of the glory of 108 was how many lives of the people that you guys changed. It was really inspirational, and it's still to this day. There's a lot of people on the show that grew up listening to 108.
And it's like there's this one we had this one song, and the last part of the song is "Each moment without you I die, oh Krishna," and it's like so loud, and like if you've ever been to a hardcore show,
can't you see Mara banging her head? Each moment.
They're all like piling on the stage, and everyone's like full body, like each moment with, and it's like the truth is, like we were really, this is like really probably too much for the last 2 minutes of the show, but we were really pushed to this path of regulated practice, which is called Vaidhi Bhakti, which is like considered to be like the very important but rough side of the Bhakti leaf. And of course, we were like all maniacs and just wanted to just like at the 108 people like throw themselves at the feet of Krishna, like with no rules and no regulations. And I was always like, Keli, sit down, you know, like, but for me, it provided this like very authentic, real space for like expressing that. And for me, I needed that, you know. It's not like my sadhana kind of has grown more steady over the time. It's usually the other way. I don't know if that's
pandemic sadhana. It's helped us all.
But that feeling and that total full expression of that was really important part of my spiritual life. And I think a lot of people, and if you ever get to see 108, and that's the song everyone waits for, and that's the moment everyone waits for in the set, I think, and they just love it. And for me, it's like my favorite part of it, because I feel like
is 108 on Spotify?
Emotion.
Are you guys on Spotify? 108.
Yep.
Okay, 108. Look them up. It's anyway. I want to say that what you're saying is, I think, absolutely correct. I completely relate with it in the same way. I don't know how I would have fit in an ashram per se with my mental makeup, and the music gave me an opportunity to be very expressive, very creative. And I think not just within hardcore, but truthfully, there is no box you're supposed to fit in per se, because we're all carved unique. And you just take what you're doing and you engage it in a spiritual way where you're trying to shed the ego. And you guys did an incredible example of it. I want to thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
It was
it's fun.
it was beautiful, and you guys are wonderful. Keli 108. You can follow her on Instagram there. We can hopefully hear her. We are praying to sweet baby Krishna that you release a kirtan CD as well as more 108 records. And
here comes my guru. Hold on, here comes my guru. He's in.
Yeah, there he is. He's my guru.
November is actually cultural appropriation of the Kartik month.
Haribo. This is our good friend Sachi Sutta, who's on Super Soul Sacred Sangha. Now we've got his better half. Thanks for everybody for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Haribo.
No, you gotta stay. You can't leave yet. This is where we clap and dance. I make a couple announcements and we clap and dance.
Okay.
Thanks for everybody who joined us on Zoom. If you want to join us on Zoom live, it's much more fun. All you got to do is email Mara at wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com, and she will send you the magical codes to join us. But you need those codes, and you have to commit to chanting one round of japa on your malas every day. Some of you aren't doing that, Zoomers, and I have a drone that will come into your window and follow you and make sure you are chanting that japa, by the way, because that's how we do things in this new world order. We're taking 2 days off. Monday and Tuesday is days off from Wisdom of the Sages. Kaustubha's moving, and we're trying to be helpful and sensitive. So we're going to join everybody back Wednesday. But don't forget, Patreon community, Madhu's got a program tomorrow night at 6 o'clock on Patreon, and Stacey Cabrera today. We love her. She's on at 1 p.m. today. Thanks, everybody. This is the fun part of the day. Ready? We start to clap and dance.